It's the beginning of the summer season, and I can imagine a steamed lobster, corn on the cob, and homemade blueberry pie while enjoying a spectacular coastal view. This quiet bay in down east Maine, which overlooks a group of working boats, is the perfect setting for a seafood feast and a great subject for a watercolor painting. In this video, it's wash day, and we'll pour it on with Dixie cups to create a blemish-free, clear blue sky. We'll use a graded wash to paint a distant island that disappears into a hazy mist, and paint a group of working boats peacefully moored in the bay. Before you try this video, go to my website at watercolorpop.com, and on the Paint Along with Pop page, download my notes and reference. You'll find the links in the description box below. I suggest you watch it all the way through, and then rewatch it as you paint, pausing as needed. I always like to start with a little inspiration from artists whom I admire. John Pike wrote 2 great books on the subject of watercolor and was a master of the watercolor wash. The sky in his painting Castle Invaded seamlessly transitions from a greenish blue color to a warm pastel orange toward the horizon. He truly was a master of the medium. Harry Ballinger's book, Painting Boats and Harbors, is a terrific resource for anyone wishing to learn more about drawing and painting boats. His painting The Green Boat illustrates his knowledge of the nautical subject. With these images in mind, let's begin. We're going to paint the sky and bay at the same time, so wet the entire sheet. You'll need 2 Dixie cups. Put a few tablespoons of water in each. In one cup, add about 1/4 inch of cadmium scarlet, and into the other, add about 1/3 inch of cobalt blue. Mix well. There's an atmospheric tone to a clear sky. It's mostly blue, but gets progressively lighter and may change color towards the horizon. Some days are considered to be orange or reddish. A cold day may be slightly greenish. We're painting a hazy, hot, and humid effect, so the progression in our watercolor will go from cobalt blue to cadmium scarlet. Make sure the paper's soaking wet, and then pour the orange-reddish color into the middle of the paper. Roll the paper around so that the color goes everywhere. Now pour blue along the top of the paper and blend together. Don't be frightened, just go for it. Pour more blue along the bottom and continue to blend the colors until you achieve the desired effect. Hope and pray for the best. Whenever I share the studio with oil painters, they marvel at how easy it is to do a clear sky in watercolor. In oils, the area gets muddy where the blue and orange meet, and it looks like there's pollution in the sky. With this method, that doesn't happen. The colors pleasantly blend, creating a beautiful, even-tone wash. I thoroughly dry the board, bulldog clamps, and outside edges of my paper to prevent a watercolor bloom from occurring on the sides of my painting. This is important. I also remove some excess blue in the immediate foreground. The shine in the area of the bay is just beginning to disappear, and it's a good time to put a few ripples into the water. Using a 1/2 inch flat brush, put a few lines of darker cobalt blue in the bay. Notice that I always dip my brush into a paper towel so that I'm not adding excess water, only paint. Completely dry the paper. I use the back of my hand to test to see if it's dry. Mix Payne's gray using cobalt blue and ivory black, and mass in the top part of the island using a dry brush technique. We want texture for the tops of the trees. You can't make out where the island meets the bay because of the haze. It fades into the water, and we'll use a graded wash to paint in this effect. Working quickly, before the bottom edge dries, hit it with a brush loaded with clean water. Keep applying water until it disappears into nothingness. Do the same for the islands on the far right. Dry the paper for the next step. We're going to mass in all the lobster boats using a darker Payne's gray. That's cobalt blue and ivory black. As I was painting this area, I didn't realize it was still wet, so I quickly dab it up and hit the hairdryer again. In another video, I'll do more about drawing and painting boats. But for this demonstration, here's a few pointers. Keep the span between the top edge of the boat and where it meets the water very narrow. The edge of the boat curves from the bow down to its lowest point, somewhere near the middle, and then goes up slightly towards the stern. Although the cabins are squarish, use the lights, antenna, and gear to break up the boxy shapes. I leave the top planes of the boats unpainted to suggest that sunlight is hitting that area. I make the boats that are closer to the viewer a little larger and darker in value. It's not a dead calm, so there isn't much of a reflection from the boats. Make the edge where the boats meet the water a little ragged to suggest the agitation. Wherever you do see a reflection, make it a little darker in value. I'll bundle a lot of the boats together, not being too careful to make distinctions between them for the lost edges. When we paint, it's important to make good, complicated shapes. For example, if your boats look like a very young child painted it, then you're making things too simplistically. Make subtle value variations in the boats. Make the boats in the back a little lighter, then the ones closer to us a little darker. Before the boats completely dry, drop in a little bright color for the waterline on the bottom edge of the hull. Here I'm using some cadmium red medium. The paper's slightly wet, so the color won't bleed all over the place. Do this on the other boats. You can use dark green and blue for variation. Some boat reflections extend further down into the water. I prefer to use a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch flat to paint these horizontal lines. I switch over to a number 6 round brush to drop in the red water line on the boat. The top plane of this lobster boat is slightly greenish, so I drop in a little Windsor green and a lot of water for this area. When you paint, don't be a filler-inner. Take chances and let your colors wet blend and fuse together. Not only will your paintings look good, it's fun to do. Here I'm using the side of a 1/4 inch flat to paint the antennas on the boats. This boat is probably going to be the focal point of the painting, so I'm going to make it more detailed and more colorful than the others. When it comes to painting reflections, keep these points in mind. Light things reflect a little darker, dark things reflect a little lighter, and the middle values reflect about the same. I use a flat brush making horizontal strokes for this boat's reflection, and I drop in some dark green for the waterline while the paper is a little wet. The power boat in the front is probably the darkest of them all, so I add more blue in the mix. I use some ivory black for the outboard motor and let all the colors wet blend together. Again, make a complicated shape and connect it to its reflection. Another point about reflections, they tend to be a little greener in color as well. So I drop in some green into my Payne's gray mixture for this boat's reflection. I take my time, and I love to paint the abstract shapes that reflections make in the water. This boat has a little red to the color in its edge, and again, I put that in while the paper's a little wet. I'll paint this boat in the distance a little lighter in value and bluer in color. The foreground has large granite blocks, grass, and a small boat on the left. The left side of the dinghy is in shadow, so I'll block that in first. I'll mix a dark Payne's gray for the shadows on the granite blocks and leave the underlying color for all the lighter values on the stones. Along the way as I amass, I'll drop in some orange and red color for the local color on the rocks. Again, I'll do that wet and wet. It can be confusing painting in these shapes, but I find that it helps to squint at the subject and try to paint it in a simple way. Mix some cadmium lemon yellow and some French ultramarine blue and a lot of water for the grass color. Mass in the grass while the rocks are still a little wet, but not too wet. We do this for the lost edge. Finally, put in your accents. An accent is the darkest value typically found in the immediate foreground. You can use French ultramarine blue and a little cadmium red deep, or black and blue as I did here. Put a few accents here and there for the darkest underplanes. I hope you enjoyed this demo. To find out more about me and my art, visit my website at watercolorpop.com. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel to see new videos as they are released. You'll find a link below. If you enjoyed this video and would like to leave me a tip, I'd greatly appreciate that. On the Paint Along with Pop page on my website, click the commerce button that says Tip Joel. No worries if you can't. Keep watercoloring and stay well. Bye-bye.